Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. During the fifth weekend of 2025 that ended on February 2nd, two new movies made it into the weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. And their cumulative total earnings for the weekend rose considerably by 67.65% to $63.2 million, as compared with last weekend's adjusted cumulative total of $37.7 million. Even so, it was the fifth consecutive weekend that the top 5 cumulative domestic box office total was below $100 million, but was above $50 million for the first time in 3 weeks. Thus, it was a better weekend for domestic movie theaters overall. But before proceeding, if you're enjoying this video, please consider pressing the like button, and if you'd like to see more of my content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel. And I want to convey my deepest thanks and appreciation to everyone who has subscribed. This weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office included the following. Opening at number 1 was DreamWorks Animation's family movie Dog Man. Opening at number 2 was Budget Light Pictures, New Line Cinemas, Warner Brothers, Vertigo Entertainment's, and Subconscious's low-budget horror comedy entitled Companion. Falling to number 3 was Walt Disney Pictures' animated prequel entitled Mufasa the Lion King. Falling to number 4 was Sony Pictures, Columbia Pictures, Big Boss Entertainment's Color Creative Televisions, and 4 other studios' low-budget comedy entitled One of Them Days. And falling to number 5 was Davis Entertainment's Icon Productions, Hammerstone Studios, Media Capital Technologies, Lionsgate's, and Blue Rider Media's relatively low-budget suspense thriller entitled Flight Risk. Dog Man opened by earning $36 million domestically and $4.6 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $40.6 million. Companion opened by earning $9.5 million domestically and $5.5 million internationally for a global gross opening weekend box office total of $15 million. Mufasa the Lion King earned another $6.1 million domestically, $17.9 million internationally, and $26.4 million globally to bring its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $229.5 million, $423.5 million, and $653 million respectively. Domestically, One of Them Days earned another $6 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $34.5 million, but it hasn't earned any money internationally. Flight Risk earned another $5.6 million domestically, $4.2 million internationally, and $9.8 million globally to bring its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $20.9 million, $4.2 million, and $25.1 million respectively. I'd love to know in the comments below whether you watched any of these 5 movies this weekend and what you thought about them if you did, or whether you weren't interested in seeing any of them. So even though this is 2025, we're continuing to deal with the 3 highest grossing movies domestically for 2024. And those 3 movies remained Disney Pixar's animated movie Inside Out 2, Disney and Marvel Studios' MCU movie Deadpool and Wolverine, and Universal's Wicked, with domestic box office earnings of $653 million, $636.7 million, and $470.9 million respectively. So Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine remain the only 2 movies so far for 2024 that have broken $600 million domestically, and Deadpool and Wolverine became the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time domestically. And globally, the 3 highest grossing movies for 2024 remained Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2, with earnings of $1,698.9 million, $1,338.1 million, and $1,036.8 million respectively. Thus, Moana 2 is only the 3rd movie so far for 2024 to break $1 billion worldwide, after Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. Inside Out 2 outperformed last year's highest grossing movie worldwide, Barbie, by $251.3 million, and Deadpool and Wolverine became both the highest grossing R-rated movie worldwide of all time, and the MCU's 6th highest grossing movie worldwide of all time. The reported production budgets for Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2 are $200 million, $250 million, and $150 million respectively. And to estimate what their break-even point ranges might be, I'll multiply each movie's production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And when I do that, we get the following estimated break-even point ranges. For Inside Out 2, we get an estimated break-even point range of $500 million to $600 million. For Deadpool and Wolverine, it's from $625 million to $750 million. And for Moana 2, it's from $375 million to $450 million. Thus, all three of these movies have made bank. That brings us to several other movies that I am continuing to track but are no longer in or never were in the top 5, and they include the following. Falling to number 6 was Paramount Pictures, Sega Sammy Group's original films Marza Animation Planets and Blur Studios' animated three-quel entitled Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Falling once again below the top 5 to number 7 was Walt Disney Animation Studios' sequel entitled Moana 2. Falling to number 12 was Universal Pictures and Marc Platt Productions' musical fantasy entitled Wicked, starring Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, Jeff Goldblum, and Michelle Yeoh. And rising to number 25 was Columbia Pictures, Sony Pictures, Marvel Entertainment's, and two other studios' supervillain movie entitled Kraven the Hunter. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 earned another $3.2 million domestically, $11.5 million internationally, and $16.1 million globally to bring its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $230.5 million, $232 million, and $462.5 million respectively. Moana 2 earned another $2.8 million domestically, $6.9 million internationally, and $10.9 million globally to bring its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $453.9 million, $582.9 million, and $1,036.8 million respectively. Wicked earned another $1.2 million domestically, but it had no new international earnings, which brought its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $470.9 million, $247.7 million, and $718.5 million, respectively. Kraven the Hunter earned another $45,000 domestically, $119,000 internationally, and $193,000 globally to bring its current domestic, international, and global gross box office totals up to $24.9 million, $36.7 million, and $61.6 million, respectively. Now, to know whether these movies are going to break even or not, as well as how much money they might be losing, we need to estimate their break-even points. When a movie's marketing budget is known, we can add it to the movie's production budget and then multiply the sum by 2. Otherwise, we can multiply the production budget by 2.5 for a single mid-range estimated break-even point, or by both 2.5 and 3.0 for a broader estimated break-even point range. Both methods account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. For Mufasa the Lion King, with its production budget of $200 million, as reported by multiple sources, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $500 million to $600 million. For Sonic the Hedgehog 3, with its production budget of around $122 million, as reported by the New York Times, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $305 million to $366 million. For Wicked, with its reported production budget of $150 million, that yields a break-even point range of $375 million to $450 million. For Kraven the Hunter, with its reported production budget of $110 million, according to Variety, that yields an estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million. So in this video, I am no longer projecting or never have projected what the final domestic or global gross box office earnings might be for the movies Wicked, Moana 2, or Kraven the Hunter, because their expected future earnings are either currently too small, possibly non-existent, or going unreported, or their projected earnings aren't much higher than their current earnings. Wicked and Moana 2 have already made bank. But for Kraven the Hunter, with its reported global gross box office earnings of $61.6 million and its estimated break-even point range of $275 million to $330 million, the movie currently stands to lose somewhere on the order of $213.4 million to $268.4 million in global gross box office revenue. Then, by dividing the losses in global gross box office revenue by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, the affected studios currently stand to lose the following. For Kraven the Hunter, Columbia Pictures, Sony Pictures, Marvel Entertainment, and 2 other studios currently stand to lose around $106.7 million to $134.2 million. And since Kraven the Hunter isn't going to be earning that much more money during the remainder of its theatrical run, it's currently poised to replace Madam Web as Sony and Columbia Pictures' lowest-grossing Marvel movie of all time, both domestically and worldwide. And that now brings us to the movies whose final domestic and global gross box office revenues I am currently projecting, which includes Mufasa the Lion King and Sonic the Hedgehog 3. For Mufasa the Lion King, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $242.3 million at the low end, $245.2 million at the mid-range, and $249 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 35.15%, which is lower than last week, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $689.3 million at the low end, $697.8 million at the mid-range, and $708.6 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection. So with the movie's estimated break-even point range of $500 million to $600 million, Mufasa the Lion King has already made bank. For Sonic the Hedgehog 3, using a range of possible average weekly drops from 30 to 40%, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for the movie may range from $237.5 million at the low end, $239.1 million at the mid-range, and $241.1 million at the upper end, which is lower than last week's projection. Then by using the movie's current domestic share of 49.84%, which is lower than last week, I can project that the final global gross box office earnings for the movie may range from $476.4 million at the low end, $479.7 million at the mid-range, and $483.8 million at the upper end, which is more narrow than last week's projection. And with the movie's current global gross box office earnings of $462.5 million and estimated break-even point range of $305 million to $366 million, the movie fully broke even and is making bank. So to recap, Kraven the Hunter is a definite flop, but Mufasa the Lion King, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, Inside Out 2, Moana 2, and Wicked have all made bank. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video and whether you have or are planning to see any of the movies that I talked about. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.